Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick. Want to come out with a special episode to talk about the impacts of the Ronnie Stanley re-signing. I'm sure everybody in Ravens, with the range of my voice, if it's a Ravens fan, is fairly happy with the Ronnie Stanley re-signing. The amount seemed about what we might have expected. 3 years, $60 million. 44 million of that reportedly coming in the first 2 years. I haven't seen that officially yet, but I believe that's the case. The importance of that is what we just saw with Myles Garrett. We wouldn't want, or what potentially happened with Marshall Yanda and others at the end of their career, where they weren't really incented to play that last year of the contract for the amount of money involved. The 16 million, hopefully, and is probably divided between a roster bonus and a salary, is probably money that will incent Ronnie to play or perhaps even extend at that point. That's very important to not become an old maid contract for a player like this. It's think of it as a $44 million contract over 2 years with a $16 million team option in the third year. And you just need to make sure that it's not a Myles Garrett situation where it could have been, let's say, the same total dollars involved, 60 million over 3 years, but there's $1 million paid or something in the third year. And then it becomes a Myles Garrett option to play that year or not, or to hold on or whatever. And that's how Myles Garrett was able to leverage all that additional money that came from the Browns this weekend. So Ronnie Stanley, I don't believe, has that sort of contract, and happy that that's the case. When you look at the total value at 60 million over 3 years, I think the obvious choice is to compare it to Alaric Jackson, who just signed in the last week for 3 years and 57 million. I think it is a reasonable relationship between the two contracts. There's things about Alaric Jackson that are probably not as good. He probably, this is a real question, is not as good a pass blocker as Ronnie. He does get penalized less. He probably is a little better run blocker at this point, but the Ravens do some other things with positional run blocking and whatnot that really make Stanley's role one that wouldn't always show out in, say, PFF grades, for example. There are other ways in which Ronnie is just not as good, and PFF is overcrediting, and he gets penalized a lot. We'll get into that some. Gives up a lot of pressures, and I'll get into a measure of that later. It's very different between the way I score it and the way PFF scores it. So whoever you believe, at least you've got a couple of goalposts to look at. PFF is giving you, I think, a very rosy picture of it. I'm probably giving you something that's less rosy, and I think actually some of the pressures he allows, as I've alluded to many times on the show, are not that bad for Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar Jackson takes a slowly encroaching pocket from that blind side very well, occasionally getting bumped, and being able to move is something he can do very effectively while extending plays, whereas other quarterbacks are either forced to throw the ball quickly, potentially to the team's disadvantage because they're less mobile quarterbacks, and not dependent on having extended plays to improve their statistics. But I think Ronnie's relationship with Lamar ends up being one where he allows more pressure because he gives ground in order to maintain his mirror, moving left or right to follow the pass rusher while giving ground. You think of it as kind of taking a step back to continue your mirror, whichever way you go. Less likely to get beat around the corner, less likely probably to get beat cleanly to the inside. Does give up some bull rush pressure, but a guy who works very well with Lamar Jackson. We've seen that when he's healthy. The Ravens offense has been as good as it's ever been in 2019 and 2024 and early 2020 in particular. And for a lot of 23 as well, when Ronnie was having a comeback year, not as good, but in terms of the trend during the year, moved up to have a better year towards the end. We really did not see something particular from the end of 2023 at any point in 24. We didn't see Ronnie returning to aggressive outside of the pocket play to try and defend against encroaching edge rushers, something where he would get more physical outside the pocket and reduce the chance that the pocket gets compressed from his side. I'm not going to say it's good or bad in general, but I think that it just is something we didn't see. Stylistically, it seemed like he's something he tried at the end of last year to do differently, and we didn't really see it in 24 at all. And most importantly, I think, and this is really a key when you're looking at Rosengarten and Stanley, Rosengarten got a ton of help this year. Many fewer one-on-one pass blocking responsibilities. Many more chips on his side, many more second block opportunities where there's initially a tight end who then releases after a block, and then Rosengarten has to kind of clean up after that. He got a lot of such opportunities, and I think that Ronnie played on an island more. Not that he had no help; he had some. But we look at the L's and the R's in terms of both the set and the chip blocks, and there's many more R's in 2024s than there are L's. So you can probably guess exactly what that means. Let's talk about his 2024 season overall. I grade it pretty harshly relative to PFF, and I know what the reasons for those differences are. So I'm going to get into that as we go through this. I thought he had about a C+ overall season. His weighted total, including both his raw score, which is 0.70, and his average adjustment per game, which was right around 5.5 points, comes out to about 0.755, which is exactly in the middle of the C range, just a hair above that. But since it's kind of a cumulative thing over the course of the whole season, I'd say he had a C+ season, not just a middle C season. I think it could be stated there. We saw a lot of things. We saw him return to more roaming in space to find blocks as a run blocker. Good to see him get out and down the field, much more athletic looking than he's been any time in the last few years since the injury. And that's been great. He's been out in front of some Lamar option keepers this year. And we saw some of that last year, the Detroit game, and I think it was a 10-yard run by Lamar that went left off a mesh point play, but from Jackson, a mesh keeper. That was one of the really nice blocks. But he's done that a few times. It's a play they're very comfortable running when they need to pick up a few yards for a first down, or they need a key conversion, or want to take a chance on scoring. So something he's been very good at. I don't think the durability of Stanley was appreciated by Ravens fans as much as it should be. He led all left tackles in the National Football League this year in terms of snaps played. That includes the postseason. Played 1,221 snaps, played in every single game. There were some scary moments during the year where he was down on the field, and we thought, "Oh no, is this another situation, or is that same ankle again?" Et cetera. No, he made it through the year. I mentioned them numerous times, so I don't think I need to repeat it in the full story, but he has a very extensive routine for taking care of himself after every practice in camp. I assume that continues into the regular season in terms of icing and heating and exercising, stretching after practice. So that was something that was noted continually during camp. Very high penalty count. All right, so his penalty count, and I've got two different sources for this. I'm not sure it really matters, but I've got him for 42 points in lost penalties, and that's way to think of it as -2 for a false start or other pre-snap foul, but really a false start is all he'd be guilty of there. -3 for a declinable other foul. The primary one's about 5-yard foul, which the primary ones are illegal formation, and we know he had a number of those early in the season when the refs were on that ridiculous point of emphasis that didn't really last past week 1. And the other one is illegal man downfield, and that's something the Ravens in general need to figure out how to address. They did, I think, towards the end of the year, reduce penalties generally along the offensive line. Ronnie Stanley was kind of one of the exceptions of a player who didn't. McCary improved his penalties. Fa'alele improved his penalties. I think Rosengarten also did too. Linderbaum, I don't think, had the same success. And so it's kind of funny that the Ravens veterans are the guys who did not really improve their penalties as the year went off. And then I give you scoring for those things. A holding penalty or a personal foul would also be -2 points per 5 yards, plus an extra -1 if the penalty is declinable. Now, that's a change in my scoring that just took effect in 2024. It actually reduces the impact of penalties, but it's still way higher than what PFF will tell you. Now, you've heard my argument for this before, but if you want to impute the value of a penalty, there's no way you come up with PFF is an order of magnitude too low in terms of how they charge for penalties. Effectively, a drive stalling penalty, which is one of the really serious causes of uh, defensive value of variation, which accrues to the defense. Okay, so you've heard me say this before, but obviously, if the offense can move right down the field, if they get their average yards per play. So the defense actually needs to gamble for that sort of variation, and they get it in several forms. They get it in sacks, they get it in negative plays, they get them in strings of incomplete passes, and they get them in a big way in terms of penalties. And an offense that gives those away ends up stalling some drives. And Stanley had 6 stalled drives this year, which led the Ravens. Nobody else had more than 3. So the other guys who had 3 were Linderbaum, McCary, and Ricard, each with 3. So not a good season for Ronnie in terms of penalties. And we'd really hope that'd be something he'd improve on over this next contract. So hopefully we don't see that again. Going through the other things we'd like to see in 2025, of course, the Flags, continued health, very important. And, at some point, we always assume that health catches up to every player. There's also a hope that Ronnie, being a little younger than some of the other linemen that are making a lot of money in the National Football League, would still have some decent years. His own health history, I think he's addressed in some significant ways with his practice routines and whatnot. So I'm still hopeful that he could be healthy for this contract. And I think if I'm going for one other thing, there has to be no other significant concessions to age. I'm not expecting him to be better, more physical, more able to pass block, more able to get push in the run game. I'm not expecting any of that to be better in 2025 than it was in 2024. And there are, some reasons why that sort of pass blocking is or run blocking is just not quite at the highest possible level. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I would say that approximately the same overall performance would be good with a reduction in penalties. And then I think we'd see, a B year out of Ronnie. I think that's the kind of the hope. And that would be value. That would really be value in terms of the total. If you want to talk about pass blocking stats specifically, and I do want to do that for 24 a little bit, to give you an idea, and I'm looking at two totals here. PFF just does not grade him as harshly in terms of pressures as I do. So they've got him for 34 pressures, and I cannot even begin to define exactly how they call a hurry. Hurry pressure, whatever you call it. The pressures are the total of hurries, hits, and sacks. I've got him for total shares of 40 in terms of pressures that were not quarterback hits or sacks. Now, I'm more strict about it because if the cone gets invaded and a quarterback's not able to step into his throw confidently, then he would get a pressure for that. And PFF has just scored him with fewer of those, and they're much more optimistic about his pass blocking numbers. They scored him for 4 quarterback hits allowed. Now that's good because Ronnie Stanley has really tries to not let the quarterback hits. I've got him for 5 1/6. Not a big difference there. Again, it shares for me. So you look back to the first Buffalo game, he had a third. The Washington game, he had a third. The Cleveland game, the first Cleveland game, he had a half. I'm sorry, that's not right. I'm looking at quarterback hits there. Quarterback hits, he had 1, and then he had 2/3, then he had 2 in a game, then he had a third, and then he had 1, then he had a half. Anyway, the point you should be getting out of that is that these are fractional shares, and every one of these pressures, when added up across all the offensive linemen, plus any other players responsible, plus any other unblocked player where no one was really responsible, or plus anything given to Jackson himself, all of that adds up to the number of actual pressures the Ravens allowed as I saw it. Quarterback hits, sacks, same methodology. So it's dividing out the share. Now PFF, if the initial pressure comes from left tackle, comes over left tackle, that forces Jackson right into the arms of the left defensive end, which would be the guy who's opposite the right tackle to start with, then they will not give a sack to Ronnie Stanley. They'll just give him a pressure on that play. That to me is incredibly wrong. He would get a share of that sack. He might get the entire sack depending on how that play worked out. But I don't agree with their methodology in terms of how they do it. I have them for 5.16 snaps, so 5 and 1/6, and PFF has them for just 2. So that's a big methodology difference there, and it's a big difference in value, frankly. So it's something you got to make your mind up when you're looking at these goalposts in terms of how we scored in these two systems. So, overall, it wasn't a bad year for Stanley, but I think the most important part is that Lamar Jackson and Ronnie Stanley are very symbiotic in their play styles. That they do a very good job with each other, and I actually think Stanley's more valuable to the Ravens than he would be to a number of other teams. Now, he could be valuable to. Um, maybe Jalen Hurts is a quarterback he could work with. Maybe there's some other quarterbacks who are exceptionally good at moving the pocket. There really isn't anybody as good as Lamar Jackson at extending the play in the entire league. So I think that Ronnie's value with Lamar is exceptionally good, and that's why I'm more than lukewarm on the signing. Is a lot of money. If you look down the line, I think the value relative to cap could be anywhere from very good to very bad on this deal. Obviously, it could be very bad if he gets hurt. And doesn't it's not a matter of blame here. It's just a matter of, do the Ravens get value out of this signing? It could be very good if Ronnie Stanley were to even improve his play just a small amount. I think it'd be very good. I think if he could just reduce his penalties, I think it would be good. I think that would be more than a 50th percentile result if he could just reduce his penalties and not make other concessions to age. So, in terms of value, I think it's solid overall. But there's more variation in this of value on this Ronnie Stanley deal than there is on just about any of the other Ravens long-term deals that are currently out there. I'm not talking about Marcus Williams, but I'm talking about any of the other ones that are out there currently. Look at the other impacts across the team. I think this certainly means that Patrick McCary is leaving. That's a lot of versatility loss for the Ravens, but that he'll just have better offers. I would not be surprised if Patrick McCary is one of the very early UFAs signed, that some team says they can really value his versatility and they can make use of it. In some ways, it is more valuable for a team that likes to make a lot of 1-for-1 changes on the offensive line, because McCary allows you to do that. You don't have to slide the pieces around like a parking lot puzzle to come up with a new combination that then requires more continuity stress, or puts more continuity stress on your offensive line. So I think from that perspective, at least, McCary has a lot of value to some team who wants to really make 1-for-1 changes. The Ravens are now in need of a backup tackle with McCary out, and McCary, nobody was forced to play a lot of backup tackle this year. McCary started at right tackle. As soon as Voorhees went down, he moved to left guard, and then it was Ronnie Stanley and Rosengarten basically the whole year. Josh Jones played just a few snaps at tackle, not a meaningful number, but the Ravens need him back. They need to re-sign Josh Jones. I've looked at some other UFAs, and the one other backup tackle I see that would kind of be at the Jones level approximately, and meaning we don't know what we've got, we'd hope we never find out, would be Justin School from Tampa Bay. He's a guy's 28 years old now, so he's a little bit older than Jones, but I think he could make sense as another guy that the Ravens would sign. And if they sign Jones, has no negative impact on their cap formula. If they sign School, it potentially could. So anyway, depending on when they do it, I think either one of those guys would be a fairly good choice. I think whoever they get, the emphasis needs to be on pass blocking for the backup. We don't want just another big-bodied run blocker who can come in and give you a sixth offensive line value. You need to have a guy who can actually play left tackle in a pinch and can do some pass blocking for you there. We don't even know how it would play out if something happened to Ronnie. It could well be Rosengarten moving over to left tackle, or depending on the severity, length of expected absence, it could be a Jones moving in at left tackle and taking over that role. More depth is needed at guard in either case with McCary gone. So, and I'm taking that as a given here, but Voorhees and Faalele, I think, are the presumptive starters at this point. I don't think there's really any question about that. The only thing that could change that would be a very high pick at guard, I think, in which case it's possible that one of them would not be in the lineup. My bet would be that it would be Voorhees that would be removed. Faalele would continue at right guard, and they would use this new left guard. And of course, Faalele could end up being a backup tackle as well. If one of the two were to go down, he could be moved out there, and that's not an option we're looking forward to. I think Faalele, made big strides this year in terms of his ability to play guard, and I think the finish to the season was strong, and I would like to see him continue there. I think the Ravens have. I think you're fooling yourself if you think the Ravens are looking to replace Daniel Faalele. I think they could replace Voorhees, who hasn't played a lot at left guard, and could not supplant McCary when when he came back from his injury. So he won the job to start the year, and McCary was was the starting right tackle, allowed Rosengarten to ease into that job, and then when McCary moved to left guard, it was because Voorhees was hurt. Voorhees was healthy a few weeks later, and then he wasn't able to get the job back from McCary, who had played pretty well. He didn't play so well at tackle, but I thought he played pretty darn well at guard this year, and he got his penalties under control at the end. Was one of the big second half benefits for the Ravens. You look at all the things that started going right, basically in week 11. A whole lot of improvements in offensive line play, a whole lot of reduction in penalties from the offensive line, and obviously the enormous improvements from the two changes at safety and how that impacted the defense as a whole. But it was more than just those safety moves that turned the Ravens season around in the second half, or supercharged it in the second half, we'll say. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about? I think if they're looking to the UFA market, that a veteran guard would make sense. They now do have with Stanley returning, Linderbaum returning, obviously still for his fourth season. By the way, there's a big decision coming up on the a fifth-year option for him that really means they have to sign him long-term now, but that's another matter that will resolve itself by May 2nd, I believe. But I think a veteran guard would make sense, and Kevin Zeitler is a name that would make perfect sense on a one-year deal to me. I've seen PFF is estimated 1 year, $6 million for him. I think that might be light, but I think if he was available at that price, I think he'd be outstanding. I think you might put him back at left guard. He's not an ideal fit for the Ravens because he's played right guard pretty much his whole career. And I don't think Faalele could move to left guard with the additional mobility requirements of that position. So I think you want Faalele being a guy who mauls and can use his length and power to pivot the player, so you essentially open the front gate of a right-handed run game, and I think he can do that job. I think if you put him in it, and he used his arms, by the way, a lot better in those last 5 weeks, which was one of the things that was good about Faalele's improvements in season. So I think there's good potential for him to work out there, but Zeitler's never played left guard. And he'd have to take on the pulling responsibilities. He did some of it well with the Ravens, so it's not like he's not capable. I think he is. It's just a kind of a change in position, and frankly, Zeitler might not be that interested in it. And I think I guess there's some argument to be made either way for whether a left guard or right guard is more valuable, like a mobile left guard or a big powerful right guard who can open the front gate. But Zeitler may just want to play where he thinks his own abilities are maximized, and there may be another team, since he's on the open market, that would offer him a job to do that. But I think the Ravens would be lucky to have him back if they could get him at a reasonable price. If you're looking for other impacts of the Ronnie Stanley re-signing, I think this increases the chance that Mark Andrews will be traded or cut prior to his roster bonus. So I'm not sure exactly what day his roster bonus comes due. It might be the first day of the league year, it might be the fifth day of the league year. I don't have that information. OTC has $7 million in base salary for the year and $4 million as a roster bonus. So it's something where that date will be a big date on which the Ravens are going to move. If it's like the fifth day of the league year, it's actually a lot better than being the first day of the league year, which would be Wednesday. By Wednesday, it would really have to be done. But there's no doubting the fact that with every passing day, the chance that Mark Andrews will be cut is greater than the chance that he'll be traded. We're seeing a whole lot of cuts all over the league of players, um, that you're thinking, wow, that's a little surprising. A player that good is gone. Well, most of them are just pure financial decisions. The player's no longer worth the money. Mark Andrews is worth $11 million this year. There's no doubt in my mind that that's true. And there's a lot of teams, particularly with younger quarterbacks, that would do very well. But those teams are kind of playing a game of chicken with the Ravens, that they know the Ravens might have to cut him if they don't trade him or take less as they become more desperate. And so if you're a team like, I don't know, maybe the Patriots would be a team that would want to have him for Drake May, or there's others with young quarterbacks around this league who would do very well to have Mark Andrews on their team. In fact, many teams can use Mark Andrews. It's just I would say Mark Andrews could become a higher target receiver again, potentially with a younger quarterback. All right. And the last impact, I think, and this may tie into the hometown discount in some way, is Stanley is likely to maybe not finish his career as a Raven, but he'll be a Raven for life effectively after this. That even if he were to retire with another team, say 2 or 3 years from now, or in the third year of the current contract, or maybe if in a fourth year or any subsequent time, if he was with another team for a very short time, he will come back, I believe, and retire a Raven. I believe he'll make the Ravens Ring of Honor with this additional signing. So he's played, very rare to play 3 contracts with the same team and not be in the Ring of Honor. In fact, you can look at that. Sure, there's punters who do it. There are kickers who do it occasionally, but it doesn't happen. Offensive linemen who play that long with the same team, they end up in the Ring of Honor. So he'll be there. The only guy I can really think of in Ravens history who played anywhere near as long as Ronnie with the Ravens was Mike Flynn, and he had a couple different stints with the Ravens, and he just was a whole different level of player. But he's very likely to be in after this. It's a good signing. It's got to be a feel good signing for both the organization and for him personally in terms of being able to finish his career here in Baltimore and get to play with Lamar Jackson and have a chance, to go to a Super Bowl. So hopefully all that comes true. And the Ronnie signing is one we look back at and say, yeah, the Ravens really got good value out of this. And, I think you can certainly make a case for a lot of variation in value on this, but I don't think in terms of left tackle availability right now that, $20 million per year for 3 years, and the way the contract seems to be structured, at least I've heard it is structured, doesn't really make sense. So I think, in fact, I would say that if he had gone to the open market and a bidding war developed, I could see him making up to, 72 million, 75 million for 3 years, depending on the structure. And a team that's very desperate, like New England, might have been involved in that bidding. So good to have Ronnie back. I'm glad he made the decision as he did, and I think that ultimately, I hope the Ravens will be very happy with it as well. Anyway, that's it for this show. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a UFA show, you still want to advocate for unrestricted free agent. I still want to do some of those shows, but I want them to be about the lesser free agents. So the big names are all going to be gone, or the risk is that we'd record it and the big name would be signed by the time it aired. So please give me a second wave free agent, somebody who you think will last until after the draft, who you'd like the Ravens to sign. We'll be starting up a lot of draft shows in early April that will take us through most of that month in terms of position by position reviews. There should be 11 of those, as always, and then some individual Ravens draft strategy shows. So that'll take up a lot of April before the draft, and the rest of March is really going to be about UFA shows. Those shows are I think entertaining. You allow people to air their own personal thoughts on this, and I really appreciate meeting some new people that way. And also, frankly, during draft season like this, where I have a lot of review and analysis of other tape to do, it's a nice respite from very heavy recording planning, because most of the time you guys send in your notes on what you want to talk about, and I just kind of react to it a little bit, and that's nice. It's like a call-ins on the radio. Really appreciate you. All the listens have been great. And as always, please tell a friend about it, or show that older person in your life how to access the podcast online directly. That's it. We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.